Well, welcome everyone to our ICF Orange County session on ChatGPT and what it really means for us as coaches. I know we have a lot of people who are still coming in and logging on to our session today, and it's going to be a very highly participatory session. And that's what our presenters would like. I think with so many people, and I know we're not a shy group, so I know we'll have lots of good participation in this event today. We are also about 90 minutes or shy of 90 minutes for today, and I don't want to spend too much more time saying things like just all that kind of stuff. I don't want to take time from them, but feel free to mute yourselves. Feel free to leave your camera off if you need to, unless of course our presenters invite otherwise. We are of course recording this, and I guess I should mention my name's Daryl Kozak. I'm the program director for this chapter this year and president-elect, and we have a few of our board members here. Which is great to see some of those faces that are familiar and also faces that I've not seen before. It's great to have all of you. So I'm going to go ahead and introduce our speakers, and then I'm going to turn it over to them. So Hassan Archer, one of our speakers and presenters this morning, is a fractional executive specializing in facilitating change management for technology and software companies. He has worked in software development for 20 years, including 8 years at Microsoft Corporation, making mobile, embedded, web, and cloud products. After examining the causes of failed products and teams, he pursued a master's degree in clinical psychology, focusing on enacting change in complex systems. His practice is focused on quickly identifying and resolving issues at the technical, product, organizational, and individual level. He lives in Newport Beach, California, with his wife and 3 children. Steve Kinney, our other presenter today, is a business owner of an SEO company he founded 26 years ago. Steve joined the U.S. Navy Reserves in high school, where he served several years as an in-flight technician. He has a math and computer science degree and successfully worked as a software engineer. His skills for optimizing workflow led him to a career as a process consultant for Fortune 100 companies, where Steve flew around the nation, helping large companies optimize their operations. Steve is a passionate futurist and is often called upon to speak and teach regarding exponential growth and new technologies. Steve lives in Irvine, California, with his wife and 4 children. So again, it's my honor and privilege and pleasure to welcome Steve and Hassan to our chapter today.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone. I'm so glad to have all of you here today. We'll do some more introductions and tell you a bit more about our backgrounds later, but in a second. But first, let me set the framework today for our talk and our discussion about ChatGPT. Can you go ahead, Steve, and move that slide forward? So there's a lot of talk out there right now about ChatGPT and what it can and can't do. Today, we're going to talk about the potential for AI and what it can mean for your coaching business and for your clients. Steve and I both strongly believe that companies need to understand it and really make use of it in your businesses where it makes sense, right? To remain competitive. It's a necessary thing that needs to be understood and used wisely. Each of you in this call plays a crucial role with your clients, helping them understand and really embrace the possibilities of what ChatGPT means for their businesses. So today's session is going to be very practical. We're going to share some real-world situations, some case studies where AI has been helpful in our businesses and with our clients personally. This will give you some areas to explore with your clients to help them make better strategic decisions on how to make use of technology. So if you have questions as we go, please don't be shy, bring them up. I want this to be helpful for everyone. At the end of our time today, we'll have some valuable takeaways in the form of videos that will give you more information on ChatGPT for those of you who are just getting into it, how to use it, very hands-on activities you can do. So, we both believe, Steve and I, that the smartest person in the room is the group, not one person. So what we're going to be doing today is we're going to show you how ChatGPT plus a coach is more powerful than a coach. Just like ChatGPT plus a company is actually more powerful than just a company. So let's go ahead and get to the next slide. So we just had an introduction for me, so I won't dive too deep into this, but a couple of things I did want to highlight here. So I spent about 1,000 hours as a marriage and family therapist driving change in complex family systems, and that's how I approach how do you incorporate change into businesses and divisions within companies. Um, my passion is really studying technology adoption factors, and just figuring out like how do you move from just a flash in the pan of technology and really ingrain new technology to make changes in businesses that will last, right? There's been a lot of tech that bubbles up, and there's a question of, is it hype or is it real? And Steve and I are going to make the case that this is something that you really do need to learn, invest in, and it's got some great potential for you and your clients. Steve?
All right, thank you. And my background, just the one thing I'd add to this is just that the last 10 years, I have been studying exponential technologies. And in the same way that we saw the microprocessor that started back in the 80s with personal computers, that has just revolutionized our world. And one of the reasons why is because it was an exponential technology. Every 18 to 24 months, the capabilities of a processor would double for the same price. And what that's led to as far as a revolution today, we saw the same thing with the internet, the advent of the web browser back in the early 90s. Though internet had been around, in fact, in college in the 80s, we were using the internet, but it was mostly research facilities and education that were using it. But when the web browser allowed people to easily access the information on the internet, that has changed the world. And then with smartphones that started back in I think iPhone was first in 2007. That's also an exponential technology that has revolutionized things. However, what we're looking at right now is there's no less than about 30 technologies that are all on this exponential path that are all coming to what's called the knee of the curve. And we're going to talk a little bit about that today. And so this has been kind of a passion of mine over the last 10 years of studying these exponential technologies. So although a lot of people have been hearing about AI, for instance, for at least a decade, of how it has the promise and potential for upside, and also there's fear associated with it of how there's going to be a lot of jobs that are no longer needed because of it. But it wasn't until I'd say the moment of November 30th, 2022, when ChatGPT got released, that was, I'd say, kind of the turning point where people could actually see it. Everybody could utilize it. You could sign up for a free account and start using this. And very quickly, people were realizing the potential here is huge. So what I first want to kind of explain is how exponential technologies are very different than linear technologies. So linear technologies tend to every year improve at a certain rate, but it's not an exponential rate. It's just a more slow growing rate. Exponential technologies appear at first to not be growing very fast because they're doubling very small numbers, which still are very small numbers, but there's a point at which those numbers become very meaningful, right? And that turning point is where it becomes clear, and then it moves very fast from there. So we haven't seen much in the last 10 years, and I think people are going to be very surprised at what they're going to see in the next 2 years. Well, they're probably, most people that have looked at this are very surprised what they see today, but it's going to continue accelerating. One example of this was the advent of the digital camera. So Kodak actually invented the first digital camera back in 1975. At that point, it wasn't really usable for the vast majority of use cases. It was the size of a toaster. The image that it produced was a 0.01 megapixel, and by all appearances had no threats. And as it doubled, and exponential technologies, they double at some frequency. So some exponential technologies might double every 6 months, every year, 2 or 3. But the idea is that when you start doubling, it'll over time become very meaningful. So at first, back in the 70s, Kodak saw no threat at a 0.01 and then doubled to 0.02 and 0.04, 0.08, 0.16 megapixel. It had no, appearance of disrupting anything. But if Kodak had realized that that was on an exponential progression, they could have predicted what I consider right around 2001 is where the first, I'll say, somewhat reasonably priced digital camera came out. For under $1,000, you could get a 1 megapixel camera. Now, that didn't disrupt film at that point, but there were a bunch of use cases that then became enabled. And if you followed that through on a pattern, you'd see that that 1 megapixel will become 2, 4, 8, and it literally disrupted Kodak's business. Kodak produced film and processing of film. And there's a point at which they were irrelevant, but they didn't see it until it was too late. And the irony was They're the ones that even invented the technology that actually disrupted them. So with that, that gives you kind of a sense of exponential technologies in general. Today, we're talking about artificial intelligence, okay? And from within artificial intelligence, we're talking about one example of it, which is ChatGPT. So what I want to do is give you kind of an overview of how when I put AI into these buckets, it made a little bit more sense to me, right? So I put them into two buckets first. There's the robotic AI and generative AI. So I think of robotic as physical AI that affects us in a physical way. And then there's generative, which is more kind of the intellectual way. So a couple examples of robotic AI, one is autonomous cars. For those of us that have Teslas and have the full self-driving, we are seeing this improve at an incredible rate. I mean, 2.5 years ago when I first got it, it was barely usable, and it's unbelievable. Now I can oftentimes plug in where I'm going to go, and it'll drive all the way there without me necessarily having to interrupt it. Now, it's not at the point yet where I can go to sleep and they don't need to produce the car with steering wheel and gas pedals, but if it's the progression that it's on, I'm guessing within 2 to 4 years, I think the technology is going to be at that point. And when that happens, it's going to change our world in many ways. Another example are humanoid robots. We've had factory robots, for a couple of decades now in significant ways, but that's very different than an artificial intelligent robot. That's a special purpose robot that has to be programmed. Whatever task it needs to do, a programmer needs to get in and program that task. And as long as that task keeps, following the same pattern as it was originally programmed, it can do it. But what we're going to see before the end of the decade with artificial intelligence is robots that actually can on the fly figure things out and perform tasks. That's going to be really transformative in many ways. Elder care, factory workers. It's going to do a lot of help and displacement of jobs. The other side of it are generative. So some examples of generative. One is right here, images. So if you use a tool called DALL-E and you give it this prompt, so someone gave it this prompt, a photo of a quaint flower shop storefront with a pastel green and clean white facade. This is the image that's generated. This is not a picture that somebody took. This is an image that an artificially intelligent computer came up with. So now let's even step back and go, now what if they wanted to tweak that? This is a very conversation, this prompt is conversational. So it says, okay, they could say, do it with less plants, or add in some roses or whatever, and it will keep regenerating this image. You can go back and forth with it until you get the image the way that you want. So that's an example of a generative for images. There's video, audio, simulations, code, text. These are all examples of generative. And today, when we focus in on ChatGPT, these last two are what ChatGPT enables, but code development and text. So an example of code is a good friend of mine is a enterprise architect for Wells Fargo, and he had two different computer systems that different data sources, and he needed those to be able to talk to each other. Now, the usual way you would do that is to write some programming called an XSL to do that. And he, as an architect, he probably would have had a programmer go do that. He gave it a prompt with ChatGPT, and it literally generated the XSL, and he went and ran it, and it worked straight out of the gate. So that's an example of code. An example of text is I have another friend whose wife is a tech writer. She's a contract tech writer, and she had just completed a small job for a drywalling company, and they asked her to write a 500-word article on how to choose a drywalling company. She spent a couple hours researching, an hour of writing back and forth with the client, and editing another 30 minutes, and 3.5 hours later, she had this article. He just gave it a prompt to ChatGPT. It wrote the article, and he showed it to her, and she looked at it and she said, I could take 5 minutes to edit this, and I could have delivered it. In 5 minutes, what had been done, what she had spent, was it 3.5 hours doing, in 5 minutes, she could have edited it. Now, does that mean she's out of the equation? Absolutely not. Does she need to fact check it? Yes, she does. There's things called hallucinations that ChatGPT can do. It acts as if it knows something that it doesn't know. Now, those are getting significantly better. The hallucinations I saw back in late last year were significantly higher than they are today, and there'll be less later this year, but you still have to check it. But for her, if she weren't to embrace this, what she might find in the coming, few years is she's getting less and less jobs at the rate that she's billing out at. Now, it doesn't mean she's going to necessarily make less per hour. In fact, she could end up making more per hour, but by embracing this, she will stay in business and potentially, grow her income. But ignoring it, arguably, would lead to a loss of customers. All right, so now that we've kind of put this into a framework, actually, Daryl, let me just step back for a second. Any questions on this? I want this to be interactive, and it can be you or anyone can ask questions. Any thoughts on what we've talked about so far as it relates to coaches?
My gosh, I got lots of questions, but I want to make sure other people, chime in and stuff like that, because I guess my questions really aren't questions, much as like, I was actually going to put a little reaction of the wow emoji because I was, listening to all of this. But yeah, anybody have anything they want to ask? Now is your time. Please feel free to ask a question so that we do these sessions for you. There was something that came in the chat room here. What about copyright issues when the photo came up?
Great question. So I'll say that is still to be resolved. I've not heard of, I think there's been some specific instances, but in most cases, it's pretty indiscernible how it got to that, right? So what this leads us to is, okay, what is the data that's been used for GPT 4.0? That's the engine we'll talk about in a minute. The engine below ChatGPT is called GPT 4.0, and it has to get its data from somewhere. So when 3.5 came out, the data was a snapshot of the internet back in 2021, and that's where it got all of its information. Now, with 4.0 and even within the release, they're adding more and more data points. So now I understand you can point it to current web pages and it will read that web page and do it. And what you're going to see over time is more and more data sources get hooked up. But even with the data source of 2021's internet, most cases it's indiscernible how it came to how it could write that article about it, right? I mean, similar to how you go do research, right? You do research and write a research paper, and you're going to read a bunch of articles, and in cases you're going to cite them. But it's one way to think of it is it's kind of like you're training somebody. So let's just arguably say, let's say we were to train a student on molecular biology, and they're going to learn over how many years of school to get their PhD in molecular biology. Their answers, when they give an answer to something, is based on everything they learn. Now, if they were to exactly plagiarize someone, that they could get in trouble. But a lot of what you'll find here is not that's just plagiarizing, it's learned in some way to come up with this. So I don't want to say this is a solved issue. I think there are certain scenarios where absolutely you can get in trouble, but I'll say there haven't been any ways that I've used it to where I could say, okay, I think there's somebody that could have a claim against us, but it's something to be thinking about.
Great question. Yeah, and we do have a couple more things here. One from Abby. Can you address the risk of this program being free and harvesting information for research? That's question one. And then what are the options to ensure information security for users?
Okay, so actually, Hassan, do you want to jump in on any of this? I want to give you an opportunity because I know you're not in your section, but
yeah. So it's interesting, actually. There's a movement within a lot of technology companies that have been collecting this data over time, that they're now realizing they've had this data stored and they didn't really have any way to monetize it. And now they're realizing that, wow, with all these new AI applications out, and we'll get to this in a little bit, but AI is only as good as the data that it's based on, right? The system has to learn, it has to be taught. So you have to feed it tons and tons of data. And so these companies are now saying, well, I've been sitting on this information, I'm gonna go ahead and monetize it. But I think to the question that's being asked here, and this still needs to be figured out because we're just on the forefront of this movement. Well, if I, as a user, entered information and I was not compensated for it, but I stored it and I provided it for free, but now this other company is making money off of it, do I deserve compensation? Or is that covered in the terms of use for maybe let's look at Facebook or look at Reddit or any one of these sources that might be storing a large amount of information? So it really needs to be discussed and decided, but we just don't know yet. So that's kind of the long and short of it. As far as security and information for users, so one of the things we can talk about in terms of AI and ethics is really making sure that the data that you're including in your engine or that you're training in your system, when you talk to this with your CEOs, your clients, is making sure that you remove any person identifiable information, because you don't want to have things that could be then tracked back to a user. So we're looking here really at behaviors and outcomes, as opposed to identifying that Kathy Smith, who lives in Texas, has done this, perform this action, right? That's not going to be, that's not going to pass global data requirements in Europe, GDPR. It's not going to pass them in California, and the rest of the landscape. So there's a lot there to go into, but I'd say that's a place to start.
And Hassan, let's break this down into two components. So there's the data that trains the engine to begin with, right? And that's all the stuff that's freely available on the internet today, right? There's a second piece, which is AI has the capability to learn based on how you use it, right? And so a big question that people started raising earlier this year was, well, when I type in information, when I put in a prompt, is that going to then go into the data, right? So if somebody in your company unknowingly types in information that's maybe private, will that go in? And I'm pretty sure, but Hassan, maybe you can correct me if I'm wrong, I'm pretty sure that OpenAI said they are no longer, I think at first they were, but I think they're no longer using those prompts to train the engine. Is that correct?
Yeah, that is correct. That is correct. So there's a lot of movement around how do we protect company information. One of the areas we'll talk about in a little bit is really how OpenAI, the organization behind ChatGPT 3.5 and 4, has provided this nice application programming interface, so that you and your company can actually start to build some of these operations on your own personal data set within your company. And so there's a lot of work being done now to make sure that data doesn't sneak across the line and then become available. So that's a really a big area of focus.
Yeah, when Hassan gets to his section, he talks about what he's doing with one of his clients. They will be doing exactly that. They will be tying into all that corporate knowledge, all the information, all the documents, all the emails, everything they have, that will stay behind their firewall. Those prompts that they're used in that organization will be informed by that data in order to do better customer support, but that is on their side of the firewall. So there is no way for that to get into ChatGPT. Okay.
Right. Thank you.
Any more questions, Joe?
Going back to the chat room, not necessarily a question, but this is an interesting thing that Ann Kelly mentions. If relevant, please mention any connections to ethical use of AI, specifically ICF coaching ethics. Because as ICF coaches, we have that code of ethics as other people do as well. I'm not just saying we're the only ones who have ethics, but that's an interesting thing. Not so much a question, but I guess just if there's any mention about that ethical issue of this.
Great question, Hassan. I mean, I don't know specifically about a given vertical like coaching. I can't think of anything offhand that comes to mind. Do you have any thoughts?
So we look at ethical standards, and I can speak from the perspective of when I was studying marriage and family therapy, right? We have to act in the best interest of our patients or our clients. We have to maintain confidentiality, truthfulness, and advertising and marketing, like all of those standards that you would definitely want to live by as a coach in the ICF program. Those things still apply, right? So when you're working with your clients and you're talking about the possibilities of what this program can do or cannot do, that's why I think these kinds of conversations are important, because you have to be able to help them understand what the possibilities are and not mislead them on either side and say, this is going to blow up your business tomorrow, or you need to worry about it. It's really going to be helping them think through, what does this mean for my company? What does this mean for my market, for my competition? What does this mean for the strategic vision that we might have just laid this new vision out last week, and then now a new version of ChatGPT comes out and opens up a whole new avenue to explore. So I think as coaches, I would say that you probably have a duty to stay on top of this so that you can best help provide expertise and guidance and strategic direction to your clients.
And I don't know if Karen Gifford, I see you on the line. Hi. And if you have any desire to pipe in, I would love to, because I know these chats started with you and me, and I think that's how we got here today several months back. Are you interested in chatting a little bit about your journey from not knowing about this to like, how do you integrate this into your practice?
If it makes sense, I'm happy to, Steve, but if you've got a lot to cover, why don't we circle back? But I'm happy to share.
Okay. And by the way, just so you know, this whole this is not a we don't have too much in this presentation. This was to facilitate the discussion, because Hassan and I kind of thought about this and we go, there's a bunch of foundation things we want you to know, but it's the discussions that come out of this, similar to the think tanks that I think we had done with you. It's really to facilitate this discussion. And I actually think if you're open to it, just a little bit of talk of how have you integrated it, I think you might be a few steps ahead of some others here.
Sure. So I heard of it. I didn't pay attention to it. Then I get this call from Steve, who I've been involved with some of his own think tanks and that he's developed over the years. And he said, "Hey, I've got something I want to share with you. And would you come to just come to a webinar on it?" And I said, "Okay, sure." Steve does live his framing of being a future thinker or a futurist. He definitely has that inclination. And so when Steve says something like this, I tend to listen. So just full cards on the deck here. So I went through that course, and then Steve helped me with kind of playing around with it. I then had a keynote and a facilitated workshop for about 100 to 150 CEOs. And I was also coordinating or leading a panel discussion of those same, all women CEOs, by the way, for that particular event. And I thought it would be fun to ask two questions. One is, how do you keep up with technology yourselves as CEOs? Do you do it yourself? Do you have others who do it for you? And then I asked the question about how many in the room had heard about ChatGPT. And of course, almost everybody in the room raised their hand. And then I said, and how many of you have actually run a ChatGPT prompt about yourselves? And a few hands were raised, but none of the CEOs had. And so I had, with some help from Steve and his team, I was able to run 4 different essays about what is their what's the background or the profile of this particular individual. And so sure enough, there were 4, each person got 4 essays. Some of it was on the mark, some of it wasn't. So to Steve's earlier comment, or Hassan's earlier comment about this, it was only up until 3.5 and 4.0 were only up until September, I think, of 2021. So anything past that, there were some of the CEOs that had just gotten into their CEO positions, or they had a certain trajectory into that leadership seat, but they had not, but there wasn't that press was not actually captured by OpenAI. So that's kind of been my journey, and I have found it useful. Just if I get stuck on something, I just saw, I think it's Katie talking about using, she's an ADHD coach, and she's found it useful to help with clients going from idea to deliverable. And I actually sometimes get stuck. One of my own coaches is on the call here this morning. I won't name her in case she doesn't want to be named, but if you do, let me know, and I'm happy to share. And so anyway, I get stuck sometimes. And so this was actually helpful for me when I got stuck on something I was trying to work on for another presentation that I was doing for a keynote. So that's kind of the trajectory so far. And this has all happened. It's been like less than 7 months, Steve, I think.
Yeah, November 30th, 2022 is when it became available.
Okay, there we go. So we started right after that.
Yes.
Hassan and Steve and I had that first conversation.
Yeah, and I thank you for that, because one of the reasons Hassan and I started putting these think tanks together is we were talking to CEOs and realizing a lot are not even, they have preconceived notions and were not even looking at it. Some didn't even know about it. I mean, some had heard it, had preconceived notions. And by the time we got out of these think tanks, I would say every single one of the people said they were going to start using it. And then we'd hear kind of popcorn, responses days, weeks, months later of how it really has been significant, the impact that it's had. And what I'll do now is I'm going to continue on about ChatGPT, a little bit about that. And then Hassan and I are going to kind of go back and forth of how we've used it within either our organizations or for our clients to give you some ideas. And we'll anchor on some of the things that you said. So thank you, Karen, for sharing that.
And if you don't mind, Steve, I'm sorry, but there are a couple, not questions, but just some comments in the chat that I thought were really interesting. Okay. So Linda Denton said this: I used 4.0 to write an outline for a class on work-life balance. I had an outline in 3 minutes. It usually takes me 4 to 6 hours to write a class. I made edits related to my knowledge to tighten the content. I also asked for and noted the resources, except I didn't explicitly call out chat. I thought that was just really, it's like, whoa, I know if any of you played with ChatGPT, which I have, once I found out they had an app, there's an app for that. I was just shocked what you do with this. And then Katie says,
can I comment on that real quick before you do it? I just want to note the irony of that. In fact, I may use that in future presentations. I won't call anything details, but you've used ChatGPT on a class about work-life balance, and it saved you time. Just purely ironic, right?
Wow. Yeah, that's a good observation. And then Katie says, generative AI allows people's ability to critically think shine by reducing the focus on one's ability to follow through. As an ADHD coach, it has been incredibly helpful to help my clients go from idea to deliverable. So we're seeing also the benefits on another side, that it's not just the technical aspect, but also the personal, maybe even emotional aspect that helps us with that.
Right. And as an SEO company owner, one of the things that we've always helped our clients with over the years is getting stuck with writer's block, right? You know, writing great content for your websites, for your blog posts, for your newsletters and stuff like that. I mean, but even before ChatGPT, you know, writer's block should be something that no longer is necessary, because of the ways you could just use search engines to ideate. But now when you look at what ChatGPT can do, ideation is amazing. So, I mean, that's just, and Karen even touched on that. You know, when you're not even sure where to start, bring up ChatGPT. I mean, start like one consultant I know, as soon as he starts with a client, he plugs in the client's website and he just points it to the website, and it'll be real time then. It's not pulling it from 2001. It'll point to their website and say, give me an overview of what they do. And then, and he'll just keep asking recursive questions, and it teaches them. He'll plug in their competitors and do that same thing. In fact, he'll build an analysis, a competitive analysis, in a fraction of the time than if he had to go do it by hand, and deliver that from the get-go. So it's just, ideation is a great, one of the great use cases, I'll say, of GPT 4.0.
Very good. And Katie also just chimed in one more thing, saying, I also use it to write descriptions of events and email campaigns. And and so Carolyn also said here, yes, I've used it for summarizing themes in my 360 reports. I'll share all the notes and ask, what are the top 3 themes for themes for strengths and development areas? It was great for writing the reports. So it's a phenomenal technology. I think that my main thing is, I'll turn this back over to you, Steve, is one of the things I think that when we were advertising this, people have this like fear about what this is all about. And I think this is a really nice way for us to talk about it, lay it all on the table, especially we have a clinical psychologist with us, for the emotional things and everything. And I think that's really good for us to kind of deal with the goods and the bads, right? And it brings in the ethics thing that even Anne has brought in. So again, I will turn it back over to you. I just want to make sure we didn't miss some of those things in the chat.
Well, one thing actually I want to add before we move on to this, Steve, a lot of these comments I would say they're all dead on with use cases for ChatGPT. And if I was to kind of bring it up a level, I would say, what we're really talking about is gaining time, right? Work-life balance, like gaining time with the things that are knowledge-based, so that you can then play at the higher order thinking, right? So if you're familiar at all with Bloom's taxonomy, for those of you who maybe studied educational learning techniques, right? We're taking the knowledge level, the lower level pieces there, the comprehension, and we're really just going to take that and allow the machine to take that off our plates, so that we can then do the higher order thinking, right? The creativity that comes in, right? You can't just take what the system gives you and then just turn this into a term paper and say, here's my PhD thesis, right? That's not how this works. It still requires human intellect, human creativity, right? The nuance that we have to actually make this useful. And that's the piece where I find this very exciting. And I think a lot of CEOs will also find this exciting, because it allows them to do what they do that's unique to them, right? Unique to their company. What's their unique value add? Help them find that out so they can drive value for their company. And the other piece is ChatGPT can help them with the base operations.
Absolutely. And when I tie this into both my past and your past, Hassan, like in my past, when I was a process automation consultant, we get a lot of resistance, right? When I worked on a project for Wells Fargo's home mortgage group, and we were trying to optimize the home loan origination process. So you have an application for a home loan, and before our process, 27 days later, on average, there'd be a decision. Yes, we'll fund this loan, and here's the terms, or no, we won't, and here's why we won't. And their goal was to get that from, say, 27, I'm not gonna use the actual numbers, but say it was 27 down to 19 days. We had to go through every part of that complex process of decisioning a loan application. And as you can imagine, there's a lot of people that are very resistant. There were some underwriters at the very top, and Wells Fargo had 6 of, like, I don't know, 13 in the country that had this capability. And when these people walked on water, what they said happens. I'm pretty sure if they asked the CEO to wash this car, they might get that to happen. And as you can imagine, these people were very resistant at first. But when we helped them, and this isn't GPT or AI, this was just process automation. When I helped them realize that, there's a lot of what they do in their day and their week that's not where their expertise, what they're getting paid for. It's usually, it could be down in the 5% range, plus or minus, of the things that truly provide the value of what they do. And when we optimize things and pull some of those things off their plate that they don't need to do, those tend to be the things they don't like to do anyway. And when that frees them up to go from, say, 5 to 15% of their time, their enjoyment, their job satisfaction goes up, and their value to the organization goes up. And once they began to understand that, they were pulling with us. And by the end, they were our best friends. And Hassan, I know your experience from Microsoft. I know you were someone that initiated a product offering that ended up getting demoed to Bill Gates that he funded. And then you've even had a thing where you were at his house and you argued with him and agreed to disagree, and have since been proven out to be correct. So you've even seen it from Bill Gates' resistance to change.
Exactly. I think a lot of, the case I'll give here in a bit when we get to my case study, companies that are already really successful are the ones that often have the hardest time with change, because you don't want to rock the boat, right? Things are sailing really well. Let's not do anything different. But the reality is that as the technology landscape is changing, and ChatGPT kind of just being really one example of this, they need to be aware of what's happening, because their competition is also looking at these same tools, looking at the same use cases we've talked about here in the call, and saying, wow, if I can eke out 5, 10, even 20% more efficiency out of my team, that's a huge advantage. If I can motivate my people, because now they feel like this is a place where they can grow because they're doing less of that lower level work and more of the higher order thinking, I'm going to have happier, more engaged teams. That's an advantage. And there's a whole bunch of these things I think people need to think about. And I think as coaches, helping kind of break through maybe some of the fear that some of the CEOs might be thinking, or just the disinterest. If they're like, it doesn't really affect me, it's not a thing. Well, there are real numbers we're talking about if you can embrace this and use it well.
And I think when Hassan gets to his use case, I think rightly so, they should be scared not to be looking at this rather than being scared of doing this. All right, so let me move back to this just to kind of round out an explanation of what ChatGPT is. So ChatGPT is really an application that's built on a layer called GPT 4.0. Think of ChatGPT as like the web browser, and GPT 4.0 is like the internet, right? The internet has been around for a couple of decades before the browser first came, but the browser opened it up to everybody. ChatGPT is an application that exposes this power of this engine called GPT 4.0. It's developed by an organization called OpenAI, and the founder and president is Sam Altman. For those of you that are familiar with Y Combinator, he was the president of Y Combinator, the most successful, arguably the most successful incubator in the Silicon Valley. GPT stands for Generative Pre-trained Transformer. Basically, what that means is it is a neural net. For those of us that are programming wonks, what you do is you just keep feeding it data, and as you feed it data, more and more data, it learns from it. And the more data you feed it, the better it learns. And where we're at right now is, at 3.5, it was the internet, like we said, in 2021. And they keep adding more to it. And I think we're going to see that we saw this with Google, right? Google, when I first started doing search engine optimization in 1997, Google didn't even exist. And it was Yahoo, Bing, Alta Vista, Ask Jeeves, Excite. And then Google came on the scene in 1998, and it was just a much better search engine. But I can't remember what year it was. A few years later, they went to live results. Literally, instead of every once in a while, every week or two, their algorithm would update. And then the point at which they went live, it was constantly being updated. And in fact, every search made it better. We're going to see the same thing with the GPT 4.0 engine. It's going to get more up to date, and they're going to feed it more data. And so if you think it's powerful, if you thought it was powerful in 3.5, try 4.0. You do have to pay $20 a month to get to 4.0, but I find it completely worth that. And if you think 4.0 is good, later this year, the next major release that comes out is arguably going to be 10 times better. So it uses natural language processing. So what I want to do is I want to kin this to a search engine, right? We all know a search engine. What you do is you write a search or a query, and it goes out and it compares it against its database of, we'll say, hundreds of billions, maybe 1 trillion web pages that are out there. It returns web pages, not a website. It's a specific page on a site. And it'll say, here's the site, here's page that we think is most relevant. That's number 1. And second most relevant is 2. And you work your way out to 4 millionth, for a given search. But then it's up to you to process that data and make sense of it. What ChatGPT does is it's natural language processing. You talk to it as if you were talking to a person. So when my friend said, write an article on how to choose a drywalling company, and then it comes back and write a 500-word article on that. It came back with it, and then you could say, now write it so that it's an 8th grader would understand. Now it rewrote it so an 8th grader could understand, and then you could say, now add humor, and now it'll try to add humor and say, no, change the humor, and you can back and forth through natural language iterate to what you want. And it's trained to understand and respond to user input conversationally. A search engine is just a query. It's not conversation. And here's just some examples. I mean, there's really an infinite kind of examples, but one is improved productivity. Like I think it was Katie maybe that said to I can't remember who it was, that talked about how it just helped get her paper off and get started and done a lot quicker. Content marketing, it's great for developing first draft of content, or even ideate on what content to write. In fact, when we ran these think tanks, I always included a CMO or a fractional CMO in each think tank, and I found that CMOs were the most resistant in general to this. And so they were kind of I'd have some people that have already used it, some that were in the center, and I always want to have someone that's really argued against ChatGPT. And I found fractional CMOs were the most resistant when we started. But once they understood the power of this, it doesn't replace them. It doesn't replace their key content writers. It really improves their productivity. And that's when they got it. Improve customer service. Hassan's going to give you a really powerful example. He's working with a client right now. Education. I think someone here mentioned education. I mean, what an amazing way to educate. You can say, okay, explain how to change an alternator on a 2011 Ford Escape, and it will start to explain it to you. And then you could start to ask questions, and you can go back and forth. Teach me, how to do a derivative in calculus, and just back and forth is powerful for education. Programming, I think I gave you the example of programming. Here's a use case that I've heard several people say: draft an email response. They'll get a complex email in, and they'll just cut and paste that email and say, give me a draft a response to this email. And what it drafts, you then edit rather than having to write the whole thing. So anyway, this is just an example of, I'll try to give a few disparate use cases, but there's really a huge version of huge number of those. So all right, with that, I'd love to turn it back to Hassan and for you to share the case study with your client that I think is super poignant.
Definitely do that. We do have a couple other questions that have come in. I wonder if we should address those before we move on to the next section here.
That sounds great.
Okay, so looking at the questions. Yeah, so how about this one for you, Steve? So
yeah,
or Karen Gifford's question, it's moving really fast. How do you know who to trust, introduce it to their teams?
Right. Great question. So let me just look at the question. So who to trust to introduce it to their teams. So I think it has to start at the top. I mean, there has to be support at the top. And in my case study, when we get to that, I'm going to share how me as president of my company introduced it into our team. And I think that will give so it's a great question. That will give an example of how it could be introduced to the team, but it really needs at least support from the top. And I'll give you just a rough way of how I did it. And I think a CEO could start with that, and then you figure out who gets it within your organization. So Yeah, I'll definitely cover that in my case study.
Great. And then, Katie, I see your question here. While I'm using it, I have a fear of getting left behind. It's moving so fast, it won't be possible to keep up. What will be most important for us to focus on instead of trying to keep up with its exponential growth? So this is interesting. I'll talk about this here in my case study. So I'll kind of address your question there in depth, but at a high level, you don't need to be the expert in all things ChatGPT. I mean, this field is changing very, very quickly, and there's competing products. One of the questions I see here is asking about Google Bard, which is their version of a large language model. But what I'll tell you, for example, what I do with my clients. So the case study I'm going to get into here, the company I'm working with, very, very fast growing, very, very successful business on the order of $100 million a year in revenue. I've been working with them for quite some time. And they were just a great company, firing on all cylinders, very operationally gifted. And then ChatGPT gets announced last November. And just because of my background, what I do, Steve and I are talking about it, like we mentioned earlier, and I'm seeing this and I'm thinking to myself, this could have legs. And we explore it a bit more. And I start to see, wow, this could actually be a competitive advantage for this company if we can embrace it in a way that makes sense. So I'm coming in there and I'm looking at it and I'm thinking about it. And because I have a relationship with the CEO and some of the senior executive members, I'm able to come in there and speak about it. So it's really a position of trust, someone that you can trust to be on top of this. And I would say even for myself, I'm no longer an engineer. I don't sit there and play with these things all day anymore. I just keep on track of the trends and what's happening and trying to decipher where the investment makes sense. I have people that I trust that are in my network that are literally playing with the latest things that you won't even see in the news media for 6 months. So I think to answer the question, going back here to you, Katie, it's really having people that you're connected to who do have their finger on the pulse and having that relationship with them where they can, run ideas by you, check in with them periodically, and they're able to tell you, hey, here's where the trends are headed. So you don't need to necessarily be monitoring it yourself and be looking through books and trying to look up these terms. But you do, however, want to have those connections that then you can bring into your clients and you can speak from a position of authority because you know that you have someone who has that expertise. So I hope that does address your question. So then going back to my case study here, they're already very successful. ChatGPT comes out, I'm looking at it, I'm thinking about it, and I start to bring it to the attention of the CEO and the board members and the senior executives. And the way I'm looking at it is not a place of fear, but really a place of opportunity for them because their business, they have almost 3,000 people in this company and they're working on customer support. So this is tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 customer support. They work with some of the big names you'd recognize in the Fortune 500. And this industry is always running on efficiency, right? How do you answer more support tickets? How do you keep your costs down, but deliver higher quality services? And what I've realized with ChatGPT is there's a great opportunity here for them to both bring their costs down. So rather than having to double their workforce to double the amount of tickets and support requests they can handle, they could actually use ChatGPT to explore how do we have our people actually be more effective and more efficient? Right? How do we have their almost 3,000 people spend more time on the more complex cases and then be able to use ChatGPT to handle some of the more basic interactions, right?
So
How do we?
Solution, Hassan,
Yeah.
so their solution would be to program their own layer. They're not using ChatGPT at that point. They'd be programming a layer down to GPT 4.0 in order to integrate in all the data, all the knowledge they have within the organization to either allow people to get some of the customer support, some of the people calling in to get direct support, but then also for the support team that is working issues to get to answers quicker. Is that what you're saying?
Exactly. And it also allows them to look at scale because if you have, let's say, 100 companies you're working with, and you have to train each individual human brain on their technology, their business processes, how they handle returns or warranty claims, that's a lot of teaching. But if we can build this layer on top of the data that they would use to train their agents, now we have a situation where you could have one person servicing multiple different clients because their initial response, the lookup of the information and the policies and how to address it is all handled. right? So now we don't have the situation where, you call up and you ask about a warranty or return claim, you get one answer and it's someplace different from somebody else. So there's consistency that we can have. We can scale that up and deliver a better experience to their clients. So the method here, and I think this is going to be helpful for a lot of you who are going to be discussing this with your clients, is really building on that sense of curiosity, right? So do you know about this? Have you heard about it? What do you know about it? Have you considered using it? What does this mean for your company? What does this mean for you and how you do your job? That's really the place that I went to with them to say, let's have this discussion, right? And so for us, our process was look at some common data that had been released about ChatGPT and what it was doing, looking at what the competition was promoting and how they're using ChatGPT in their businesses, and then bring that back to a group discussion and then start asking questions, right? A safe place to ask questions. There are no dumb questions because not everybody is an engineer, wants to spend their time on this, but what does it mean from the business and from strategy? And that was the process we used to kick that off.
And I could imagine in that industry, when they're scratching for single-digit margins, something like this not only could be a game changer on the upside, if they don't pay attention to it, it could be their death. It could be the cause of death.
Exactly.
Does that sound right?
Exactly. Yeah. Because if you're not following up on this and your competition is on social media or they're doing ad campaigns, they're on LinkedIn, they're talking about how they're using this technology to bring margins, right, to bring pricing down or efficiency up so they can handle more tickets, your customer's question is going to be, well, where's your place in this market? What are you doing? How are you making this better for me? So it becomes kind of a thing where to remain competitive in the market, you do have to at least understand and have considered these tools. You don't want to be caught in a discussion with the media or an interview or a conference where your client hasn't had a chance to think through what this means for them. And that's really important.
So Linda Denton asked, in what ways can you use AI for your coaching clients? And so the two categories that come to mind is, one is, I could imagine a coach, when you're working with a new client, I mean, that I'm sure you have to do a considerable amount of research to understand their business. I would start to use it to educate yourself as quickly as possible about the business, the competitors, the competitive environment. Even ask ChatGPT, where should we focus our marketing? There's a lot of questions you can ask. It's surprising what'll come back. The other way is asking your clients that you work with, have you analyzed it? Or how has your team analyzed it? If the answer is no, they haven't, and they have 5 reasons why they haven't, challenging them on that, asking them some questions. It's not that you have to be an expert in it, but I think it's more the poignant questions that you ask than the answers that you give. So anyway, those are a couple of thoughts.
One thing that's actually interesting, you can use ChatGPT to ask about ChatGPT. So if your question is, how do I keep up with what the latest developments are? You can actually ask the system what's been happening. And you'll get, again, just a friendly version of what it does and what's been happening and what the capabilities are. So that can start to become that trusted companion that I mentioned to you, that all of us should have in the work that we do. ChatGPT can help you get there. So the other question that I ran into with my client is, well, this just sounds really expensive, right? Software engineers are really expensive. AI experts sound really expensive. Microsoft's involved in this, Google's involved in this, they have really deep pockets. How can I possibly get involved in this? And the reality is it's a really, really small team, because the way that OpenAI has built their interfaces, it doesn't take a lot of people to connect and use some of those libraries to work on the data that your clients already have. So the past several years, big data has been a thing. You might have heard about that in the media, and everyone's using databases now and storing information. And now for the first time, you have an easy interface to kind of dig into some of that data, assuming it's been prepared correctly, and that's a separate discussion. But for a lot of these companies, they have this data already there, sitting on databases in the cloud, AWS, or other places, and now you have a way to actually use it. So we just took a small team, just a couple of engineers and a product person, and said, start looking at the data that we have and start looking at how can we use OpenAI's interface to actually use this to start setting up a chat interface to access this. So again, minimal investment, especially when you consider the cost of trying to double your workforce to double your throughput. This is significantly cheaper and is a really small experiment you can run. And then the last thing I would say here with this client is, we're looking mostly right now at just the operations and how do we make the associates more effective and more efficient with a higher level of service. But you can also take some of the cases that Steve mentioned earlier and apply ChatGPT to all of those. So how does this affect your HR department and your policies? If now you can have all of your policies in one place and ChatGPT can become the interface to look at your how you handle some of these cases, or how do you adjust your marketing and look at the marketing department and how they do their messaging, or your content generation, or your product development, and look at your competition to see what they're doing. There's just a ton of areas where you can drive bits of efficiency from using ChatGPT effectively. And I really do think it's going to be a tool that everybody has to have in their toolkit. Just like you wouldn't try to write an email now on a typewriter, you'd be using a word processor at the very least, an email client. That's where we're heading. And you just need to be aware of what those tools are. Question. I know I see a lot of chats here, and I try to read through
Daryl,
these.
why don't we turn it back to Daryl for just a minute? I know you've been kind of watching these chats, and you could maybe sum up some questions or give your feedback on if you feel like you have a sense of how you could use this with clients yet, or where are you with that thinking?
Yeah, I think so. I appreciate that. I'm just trying to, when you said about look at the chat, yeah, we have quite a few things in here. So I don't know if it's really easy to summarize them because some of them are a little bit different. And I do want to make sure and respect those who've patiently had questions here. I know you did address, let's see here. So just bear with me 1 second here. Ray, I think that's your name, Ray Pirovic. What is the confidential of what we search for if we copy and paste private email interaction, et cetera? Kind of goes back to that ethical issue. So that kind of, I guess, addresses that piece.
Yeah. Why don't, if anyone wants to, so at the end, we have our email addresses and we have a place where if you want to download those videos that I used to train, I'll show you these videos I used to train my team. I'm offering those up if anyone wants them. But if you contact me, if you want more information, I will get the research. I don't remember where I read it, but I'm pretty sure with 4.0, they don't use our what we put in as a prompt. But if you just contact me, I'll look that up in the next day or two and point you to just to confirm that. I want to be sure that we answer that question. But contact me and I'll get that information for you.
Sure. And then one is just a kind of a comment. A career strategy coach has seen this new organization using AI to help give advice to high school and college students. It's a good source of info, but clearly doesn't replace a life coach's values. So, and that's kind of also testimony to us. We still need coaches, right? Even though we have all this technology on our side. But yeah, I just want to.
If anything, we need coaches more than ever. Because for me, my experience with coaching, gosh, it was close to 10 years ago. I was researching for my clients because we recommend in other service providers for our clients. And I was realizing I had several clients that were going, hey, I really appreciate what you do here, but I need this and that. And one of the things I started looking for was business coaches. And so I started searching for my clients, and interviewing business coaches to see who I'd be comfortable with. Well, that's how I actually ended up with my first business coach. I didn't realize I needed one until I met someone that's on this call here, Karen Gifford. And I realized, wow, I didn't know what I didn't know. And I mean, I can learn so much in a year. And I feel like with Karen, I don't think I could have learned in 5 years what I learned in 6 months. And some of the things I probably would have maybe never learned. But coaches are more valuable than ever, especially as the world gets more complex. But some of the most poignant things were not what Karen told me, but what Karen asked me and where that led me. And I feel that's exactly where ChatGPT is. It's not about the answer, it's the question. Are we asking the right questions? And are we learning to turn to this tool to ask questions?
Which is actually segues right into this next thing I was going to mention, because Raphael said, how do you recommend us to best structure our prompts questions when using it to maximize results? I know for myself, I did a thing a couple of weeks ago. I was playing around with my nephew with this thing, and I put a 1,000-word essay on Moby Dick. And of course it came out. And he goes, how about saying as a first grader? So I did it. And all of a sudden it's like, once upon a time. And I'm like, oh my, and in seconds. So yeah, I think Raphael's question is a good one about how do we best ask these questions to this ChatGPT?
Well, I think there's a parallel to when we first started with web browsers and search engines. When we first started with search engines, if we could look back on the first week of our queries to search engines and compare it to with what we do now, I think we'd laugh. And if you compared week 1 of a search engine to month 1 to month 2 to year 2, over time, you really learn how to query. And I'd say the same thing as with ChatGPT. I mean, the first thing I do is it's time using it. And you'll see in my case study here, which we'll shift to in just a second, how I challenged my company. And one of the first thing I did is I pointed them to these 2 videos. Actually, let me jump into this and see if this is going to kind of talk about this. So how did I use ChatGPT in our business? I've got a search engine optimization company. We've been doing this for 26 years. I got a team of people. That's all they do is search engine optimization. And where we differentiate ourselves in the market is by price. Our competitors are charging $3,500 a month, and we are charging $800 a month. And we have been told anecdotally numerous times that we're getting better results at 800. And that's with my background as a process consultant. I know how to keep optimizing, and we kind of forever optimize, or I call it Kaizen forever. Kaizen is iterative improvement, and we're just constantly Kaizening. Well, when ChatGPT came available, I'm like, whoa, this is a game changer. So first thing that it is, I dug into it and I created 2 videos. One is a ChatGPT 101 video, and it's 5 minutes. It's how to log in, how to sign up for your first account, and how to begin. How does a prompt work? And it shows some example prompts. And then I did a 201 video that's 6 minutes, and I gave, I think, 2 or 3 use cases of how it could be used for a task. I asked each of the team to spend 11 minutes, watch those videos, take 20, 30 minutes, rewatch them if you want to. And then I gave each of them an hour. And I said, spend an hour on ChatGPT. I don't care what you use it for. Come up with a recipe that you're going to use to make for dinner. Come up with your weekend plans, your vacation plans. In fact, I just got back from Europe a little over a week ago, and with me and my daughter, 2 weeks. It was her graduation gift. She got to pick everywhere we went. We used ChatGPT to help lay it out. She picked cities, and we said, okay, we got 14 days. My teenage daughter, 17. Here's the 5 cities we want to go to, plan the trip. And it planned the trip for us. It was amazing. Now, did we tweak on it? Absolutely. But man, it got us started. So I asked each member of our team to spend an hour playing with ChatGPT. After that, we held a group meeting. And in that group meeting, we brainstormed. We said, let's just brainstorm potential ways we might use this in our business. And the idea was to make us more efficient, right? So for us, there's always more we can do, right? At $800, there's only so much we can do. And if we're better than the next company, for the price, if we pick the best right next things and are efficient at it, we get better results. So we then A/B tested those ideas. Okay, let's do these tasks several times with just a person, and let's do it with a person plus ChatGPT. Now the results, the first result was pretty astonishing. We completed the task on average in 45% less time, which for me, I mean, every penny counts. That was huge. But here's what's dramatic, actually. Whoops. I don't know what I just did there. Let me get back to it. We actually found that half of the tasks resulted in better quality. Now, the other half resulted in at least as good a quality as before, because it's a human plus ChatGPT. So we didn't have lower quality, but half of them, we got better quality for less price. That was dramatic. So anyway, Daryl, what are your thoughts? Does that give you a sense of how, that's just one way of how we as a small 9-person company started using this?
Yeah, I think so too. I think the best way to connect with that is, like you said, just play around with it. It's like I did with using that illustration of the Moby Dick example and fine tuning it. I did another thing one time when I said, tell me the Star Wars saga as if you're Donald Trump. Tell me the Star Wars saga as if you're Bernie Sanders. And oh my gosh, I mean, it did give a little prompt saying this is all speculative because, but I mean, it brought in the language, and I'm like, I can completely hear Donald Trump's voice. I can completely hear Bernie Sanders' voice in these scenarios that I gave it. And yeah, I think that's really the best thing, is just play around with it. If you just start out saying, 1,000-word essay on Moby Dick, fine. 1,000-word essays on the music of U2, fine, or whatever. But also is an interesting, because I was playing around with poetry. I had it write a poem on Star Wars, and I was like shocked what you can do with this thing. I mean, I've got to admit, I've been spending more time on ChatGPT than I think on watching Instagram and TikTok videos now, because it's been so much more engaging and fun and everything. So it also connects with another thing here too that Linda Denton said a couple minutes ago. One of her tools is a Growth Edge interview, which is a recorded session where she is listening for the level of adult development. Can she teach AI to help with this?
Hassan, what are your thoughts?
If we have the data, we can ask the questions. So the question is just going to be a matter of, do you have the data? All of these systems are only going to be as good as the data that they're based upon. So if she can find that data source, then absolutely.
And
Okay.
my answer is a question of if it's today or tomorrow, right? So what we're seeing right now is the tip of the iceberg of what we're going to see in a year or two or three. This is proof of concept. What came out on November 30th was proof of concept. And I think even Sam Altman and the team at OpenAI are surprised at how fast this spread. It got people's attention. Usually, Hassan and I are used to in technology adoption, it's a slow ramp. When you introduce an idea to people, it takes people a while. So if you're familiar with the technology adoption life cycle that Jeffrey Moore outlined in Crossing the Chasm, 20-something years ago, we're used to this taking time. It is unbelievable how fast this is spreading. It's even to the surprise of them. And with that, what we're going to see is there's a lot of companies now that are coming with data and going, let's hook this up, right? And you'll find some of these things like, let's say some company comes in and pulls in case law for the last 100 years and puts that in. Clearly, you're going to be able to charge law firms thousands of dollars a month to have access to this, because an incredible amount of time is spent on each complex case just researching case law or researching through millions of documents. Like when I worked, I did a project for a Fortune 100 company, and it was all around producing documents for legal requests, right? So there would be a legal request that come in, produce all the documents, for customers between this date and this date relating to this product that you offered, and it would be millions of documents. Now, it's one thing to produce those millions of documents, which we served up, but it's another thing for lawyers to go through that and to find the pieces that they need to in order to do their case. We're going to find this is going to completely change legal. As soon as that data gets in there, instead of lawyers spending tens of thousands of hours of going through this, you're going to find in minutes a lot to be learned. Now, does the lawyer become less needed? Not necessarily. In some ways, yes, but in some ways, no, because the element of what you're going to have to show up in court is going to up the ante, right? So the only people that are going to really lose on that are the ones that do not participate in it. So anyway, with all that to be said, we're going to see data being plugged into this in the next couple of years. I think that's going to boggle our minds.
Hey, quick question for you. Oh, go ahead, Daryl.
I was just going to say, one of the things when you just mentioned that, it makes me think again of what Linda said earlier about that whole life-work balance, because I think things like this can help us more than hinder us. It's like, some of the technology, even like on our phones, I love having my reminders come up and notifications. It's like, oh, I got to make sure I respond to this email that I saw earlier today or yesterday. So all this stuff uses for our benefit, really. And that's my thing for it, because especially nowadays, we're expected to be on 24/7. In the day of texting and emailing, it's like I hear so many executives who never had time off, and even people who aren't in an upper management level, seem like they're never taking time off. And just knowing that there's these tools for us that we can either let it dominate us, or we can dominate it and use it and kind of have that dance back and forth between using this technology. Another question that came up here from Anne, and this kind of brings that ethics thing. My college son says that the school has mechanisms in place to keep students from using ChatGPT on paper. Do you know anything about that side?
Absolutely. Yeah. So it's definitely a cat and mouse game, right? There are tools, which then the students are going to have access to the tools, right? And so where is this going to end up? I think we're going to be in a messy middle here for a few years, but the question is where. I want to talk about Wayne Gretzky. He doesn't skate to where the puck is. He skates to where the puck is going, right? So I'd like to talk for a second about where the puck is going. I think we're going to find that schools are going to have to embrace this. What does that mean? When you learn how to write a paper, if you want to demonstrate that you know how to write a paper, I think those papers are going to have to be written in class where they control access to technology. So some papers are going to need to be written like that. I think some papers you're going to be expected to use ChatGPT, right? Because if you're a researcher and you need to be producing, papers and research papers, you're not going to want to be the researcher that's not using ChatGPT. You're going to want to, use ChatGPT to do the grunt work, and you're going to want to, be producing, the results that you're best at producing. So I think schools are going to embrace it. once we get through this messy middle here. And I think just to purely write a paper from scratch, I think that schools eventually are just going to have to say, you're going to do that in class to demonstrate that. But then outside of class, when you do papers, like, yeah, you're going to be expected to use ChatGPT.
Well, this is interesting because actually in response to this, Katie said one of her daughter's professors started making it part of the assignments. Their first draft was AI, and then he had them analyze and edit it. And their learning was so much better this way. I wouldn't say they emphasize this so because she had extra O's on there. The learning was so much better this way. So again, yeah, like you said, again, it's taking the benefits of it, right, and working with it and engaging with it. So
you can actually, Daryl, you can actually apply this to more than just writing. I mean, anything that is an iterative work or you want to improve it over time. I mean, look at the images that Steve showed us earlier with the flower shop, or in my field, when we're looking at programming, you don't always have to start at the very beginning from a clean slate, right? There's a lot of value in starting with something that you can build on and then edit and go from there. And that reduces startup time, reduces basic errors, right? There's a lot there that I think we'll start to see in the future that will be helpful for people.
Yeah.
And I'd like to answer, Bell Bath had a question that I think is really poignant, which is, will search engines be overwhelmed with too much data since ChatGPT will generate content and blogs? It's a great question. And I think it's actually the opposite, because what the search engines are doing is they're answering the same questions now that they were 5, 10, 15, 20 years ago. But the internet is orders of magnitude more data right now, and it's going to continue on that progression of being orders of magnitude. What they do really well is to isolate out which are the best, which are the best answers. And so those that use ChatGPT to generate low quality content, it's the same as people that were generating low quality content by offshoring it to people that didn't really understand how to write, right? It's the same thing. We're going to see more high quality, which is what the search engines want. And then, as information keeps getting added in an exponential fashion, as it has been, the search engines are having to keep up. But for instance, Google, for example, they created Bard, right? And Bard is a competitor to GPT 4.0 and ChatGPT. And I have a neighbor who works for Google, and he was actually the program manager for Google Drive for a bunch of years. He's now on to special projects, but he said this was an internal thing that we've been using for a few years now, and we hadn't planned to expose it to everybody yet because we were getting such huge advantage internally to what they did. They were just keeping it to themselves. Now, when ChatGPT came out and Microsoft went and they were an investor in GPT 4.0, very smart move. I mean, just another 3D chess, I think they were playing when they did this to get back into the search engine game. I'll just say this continues the progression that they were already on. They had to use more and more computers, faster computers, better neural net chips in order to discern what pages to do. It won't necessarily change that, but what you're actually going to see is better quality results in your search results because of ChatGPT, not lower, but better.
All right. I do have a couple more questions there, but I want to make sure you guys are able to address things you want to address, because we have about another maybe 10, 12 minutes.
Well, why don't we do this? Let me go into kind of the wrap up of this. And then what we'll do is with the wrap up, I have a thing where if people want those videos that I've used for my company, Hassan and I have used with our clients, we can point you to those. We're going to be producing some follow-on videos. If you want, we'll do those, and a way to contact us if we didn't answer anything for you. And then let's just go into questions after that. How does that sound?
That sounds great. Perfect. Yeah.
Okay. So just really, Hassan, my goal here today is we don't know where you are on the continuum. I think, any group that we've spoken to, we see some people that are fully embraced and excited, and they're coming to get more ideas. And we see some that are coming to, share the 28 reasons why this won't work. It doesn't matter where you are in this continuum. Our hopes are that we've maybe put this in a framework for you to begin to look at this differently. And what I mean by that is there's a lot of articles being written out there, but if you didn't even know where to put this in your mind, hopefully that framework of AI and what those different types of AI are and where it fits and some use cases here, it might just get you thinking. And what does that mean? If you haven't played with it, maybe go play with it. If you haven't been asking these questions to your clients, ask these questions. It's not that you have to have the answer, it's that they should have the answer. A CEO of a company, I argue, if they are not evaluating this in a significant way, not saying implement it, evaluating it, I challenge that they're asking for trouble. We'll just leave it at that. So, if this gets you to start looking at this different, spending a little more time learning it, gives you some ideas of where to start, great. Our purpose was nothing more than to challenge you to not ignore this. So I'm hoping that this helps you. We've given a few use cases where we've used this. The next challenge I'll say is, even if you do evaluate this or your client evaluates it today, be ready for the changes to happen very rapidly. So an evaluation today does not mean that you're not going to need to evaluate it when the next release comes out. And so at minimum, people should be challenged to understand this. So with that, here's a QR code. If you want to do this, this points you to a web page. It gives you a couple options there. You can either get to our 2 videos if you want. You're welcome to use those with you and your clients. We plan on coming up with future videos. There's a checkbox there if you want us to let you know and send you the future videos when they come out with. We've also got our email addresses here. If there's questions we didn't answer, and I know there was one person that had a question, just reach out to me and I'll get that answer for you. We're happy to follow up. And if you know of any other groups that you'd like us to speak at, or if you'd like us to come back and speak on a different angle, I know you've got another talk later this month or next month on this. This is kind of a passion play for Hassan and I. We love the technology side of it. We love where it's going, and we love to share with others. So if you know of any other places that you'd like us to speak, we'd be open to doing that as well.
And I know we do, I think, a couple program directors from other chapters who might be hearing that invitation right now also, Steve. So just wanted to mention that. So thank you.
Great. All right, why don't we just open up the floor, and I can stay even 10 minutes later to answer questions. We can do questions as long as up till that time.
That's phenomenal. Thank you for doing that. Some of our speakers are able to, some aren't. So I do want to value both of yours time. So if you're able to stay on a little bit afterwards, that is perfect. So I'm just going to go back. So there's some of these questions I want to make sure we covered here. And one thing I saw here was, Raphael mentioned, he's the one who asked earlier about, how to phrase questions. He said he read an article that suggested starting the prompt by typing, act as if you were ... Not necessarily a question, but again, so for those of you who are maybe struggling with, where do I begin? That's maybe a good prompt. Act as if you were, Arnold Schwarzenegger, I just throwing these names out. I didn't want to get political again, so I decided to throw well, I guess he was governor. That is political. But, I wanted to, act as if you're, Patti LaBelle or whatever, something like that, And I'm just shocked how quickly, again, these responses take place when you play around with ChatGPT. And Kelly asked a thing or made a question here. Thoughts on annotating this article / content written by or with assistance of AI so that readers know, she's the one who brought the ethics thing up earlier. That's actually kind of a maybe a cool way to kind of cover yourselves. That's saying that, this article was developed in connection with AI or ChatGPT.
That's an interesting topic, Daryl. I've seen companies running the gamut on this. I've seen some of them. There are some media companies out there who I won't name, but have been pretty open in some ways about they're using full AI just to write their articles, and it's 100%. And then I've seen some articles that are thoughtfully written where you can read the first few paragraphs, and then they say, by the way, that was written by AI. And then from there, they add their own input. And so some of them in the byline do say, written by John Smith with assistance from an AI, or they name the AI. So there's lots of ways you can do that. I think that, probably the root of the question is, ethically, what should you do? I don't see it as a negative to just say that this was written with the assistance of an AI. I think as a coach or as a leader in this space, you're showing that you are using the modern tools, just like you wouldn't say this paper was written with the assistance of Microsoft Word and it, replaced a couple of my misspelled things. Like it's just a given, right? That you're using the tools available to you to be more effective and to make sure you're getting the best results for your clients.
And I'll jokingly argue that if you're a tech writer and you write an article without the assistance, I think you should have to put in your money was wasted because we did not use ChatGPT to write this article.
Oh yeah, someone put Grammarly. I use Grammarly. I'm working my doctorate right now. I use Grammarly a lot. I have a subscription to that,
Exactly.
and my professor said download it, use it. They gave me, permission for that.
Yep.
But it's a good thing about that we're using it. And the thing is too, I don't think anyone's going to use a ChatGPT thing verbatim. You're going to edit, you're going to personalize it. It's
Yeah,
giving you that. Yeah.
Yeah, there's going to be a future play where the output from these systems that is just pure output unedited is going to be recognized, and people are going to say, oh, that's just computer generated content, and a lot of value in that. The question is, what original thought and synthesis are you bringing to the table on that topic of discussion? Because if you're just copying what's already out there, there's not a ton of value in that.
Right.
Hassan, what are your thoughts on so how similar is this to the internet, right? When the internet first came out, right, before that you couldn't write information. Now everybody doesn't even think twice about doing research using the internet. Before that, you went to a library and a card catalog, and it was pretty easy because you would put a bibliography and tie it to that. But the internet was the same problem back then. Isn't this just similar to that in some ways?
I think it's just the next logical extension of where we've been. It's a source of information. It's a tool to make all of our jobs better, to deliver higher quality results. I look at this from the coach's perspective, and I say to myself, you absolutely should be using this because it will save you a ton of time. You absolutely should be using this because then you can speak with authority with your clients and say, wow, check out this thing. Have you used this? Right. And now your position as an expert in this area that they maybe you're not even comfortable going into. So there's just a ton, I think, of just helping our clients get to that next step, to stay competitive, to stay on top of the curve. And I think, like the internet, this is the next iteration.
Yeah, I've said before, if we look back in time and we go, okay, the advent of the printing press back in the 1400s, I mean, that was clearly a turning point in humanity, right? And you work your way up, and maybe the advent of the steam shovel was next. I mean, you don't need 100 guys with shovels anymore, and you need a steam shovel, and it gave you leverage, right? And then I'll say maybe the Henry Ford, being able to automate the construction line for building Model Ts was next, right? And you work your way up, and then the internet, and then I'll say smartphones, and each one of these were absolute turning points in humanity, and we can see what came because of those technologies. And those technologies were just leverage. I mean, it's leverage from, instead of having to learn by speaking, one person speaking to the next and to the next to the next, you had books, right? And steam shovel made you more effective, and same with all of these things, right? I feel like that November 30th, 2022, we might look back and go, that was that turning point. From there forward, there was before that and there was after that. I think it's on that order of magnitude. Hassan, what do you think?
Absolutely. I think the diagram you showed earlier, Steve, was dead on. We are at that point of just exponential growth and change here. And it's going to be, you look back, there's going to be before November 30th, 2022, and there's going to be after. And that's just, our kids who are growing up with this are gonna be like, well, why is this a big deal? Well, of course you'd use a system like this. Why would you ever just start a paper without it? Or why would you start a marketing campaign and not at least get a couple ideas to get the juices flowing, right? It's just something that everyone's going to just assume is normal. One thing I did want to say with this group here while we're on this call is, I would like, all of you to just try, right? Just spend some time with it. Don't be scared of it. Just get in there and try, watch one of these videos or both these videos that Steve has posted here, and then just really try it out. The best thing you can do to be an advocate for your clients is to really have tried it, because then you can speak from a point of view of, oh yeah, it's actually not that difficult. I've done it, right? That's just going to really open that door and get you closer with your client. Then you're doing that value add service right there. And I would also say just asking them, hey, have you used this? And if not, why, right? Understand if there is resistance, why is there that resistance, right? And once you've used these tools a couple of times, you'll be in a better position to really say, okay, is it a legitimate concern on why they don't think this applies to their business? Or is it just a fear of the unknown? And those are some things I would suggest that coaches could use, kind of an arrow in your quiver to help that relationship get deeper.
Laura, Linda Denton, I think illustrated this well. She worked for Videotex, owned by the LA Times, when they were testing the internet back in the day. And she says, definitely reminds me of the concerns newspapers had with the changes back then. And one of the things in both Hassan and I studying kind of future technologies is the pattern of resistance is similar as to whether it was, the printing press, or whether it was steam shovels, whether it was, internet, you name it. The resistance is similar. I mean, I think we all have fear, and there's a lot of people that are entrenched in the way that it is, and they don't want it to change. And I love that quote. I think it's something like, it's hard to get a man to understand something that his paycheck requires him to not understand. I think there's some wisdom in that. So anyway, I think all of this change, and that's where I think Hassan is really good at. Has been Hassan, just for fun of it. I mean, that example of the discussion that you had with Bill Gates at his house that you and him agreed to disagree on. Do you mind sharing that with everybody? I thought that was a perfect example of resistance.
Yeah, so this was, I'm going to date myself here, but in the late 90s at Microsoft. And I was at the time meeting up with him at his house for a dinner for the intern program. We all got to have dinner with him. And I went up to him and started a conversation. And at the time, I just said, hey, the future of the internet and where it's going, do you see that we're going to be in a space where information will be freely shared? And at the time, of course, in the 90s, Microsoft business model was about shrink wrap software and licensing fees. And the answer I got back was, no, I would not do that. I don't believe in just giving things away for free. And I asked him at the time, well, in terms of just for the betterment of humanity and sharing information and data. And he politely disagreed with my perspective on that as well. So we just kind of cordially agreed to disagree in the future of the industry. But if you look ahead at what happened, now information is, in a lot of cases, is actually free. The basic knowledge is available. There is a Wikipedia. There is an entire model of software development that is based on open source. And so you make your money on the value add you put on top of a common interface or a common platform. So, these things come in and these trends hit, and the big players who are in those spots don't necessarily want to take those leaps because it does threaten their business model. And so I think as you're all talking to your clients and looking at this, one of the things that you need to think about is the more successful they are, the harder this leap is going to be, because it's something they have not considered and could really change the paradigm. But I feel that as coaches, and this goes back to the ethics, it's your duty to warn them and to give them the access and the information to say, this could be a thing. That could be a light at the end of the tunnel, or it could be a train. But either way, you should probably take a look at it before you hop on the truck.
Yeah, and what's interesting when you look at disruptive technologies, most of the time the disruption comes from outside of the industry, right? So let's take a look at Tesla, right? I had been studying Tesla for a couple of years, and about 6.5, 7 years ago, I looked at this and I go, this is a game changer. And I put way too much money in Tesla. My financial manager sat me down and tried to tell me how crazy I was. And I tried to explain him exponential technology and what's going on and how this is pretty obvious. It's a gamble, but and now here I am, 11, 12 times on my money. And I think by the end of the decade, it might be 100 times on my money. But the history is the disruption comes from outside. It's not coming from the Fords, the GMs, the Toyotas, the BMWs. It's coming from disruptors outside, because the establishment typically really is just built around, they spent decades around stasis, around keeping the stasis that they've built, not about change. And so again, what you're saying, Hassan, is you're going to find the more established and comfortable your client is, the more chance that they're not going to be around in 5 or 10 years. I'll just even go that far as to say it. And so, how do you, in a respectful way, help them to recognize, from history, looking at history, that disruption is going to happen whether they want to or not. Now, if they've got the leader position, they might have the capital to make some changes. They might have, the culture that resists that change, right? So hence they might need you more than ever as a coach through those cultural changes. But putting indecision is a decision.
And if I can just speak with, I don't want to interrupt you. I know that I see some people leaving the call already because we're past our time of ending. I know, Steve, you graciously said you can stay on for another 10 minutes or so, so I will take advantage of that for our members. But for those who maybe have to leave, I do want to say thank you, Steve. Thank you, Hassan, for being here. I've had the benefit of knowing these guys for a couple of weeks because and Ronnie as well, because we've been able to meet with the two of you to talk about this whole session. This was phenomenal. And again, it's being recorded, which is great for those who had to maybe leave early or couldn't be here for one reason or another. I just want to share a couple things, and I'm putting a link in the chat right now to our website for ICF Orange County. We do have some more things coming up here. The second and fourth Tuesday of each month, we have this coaches supporting coaches at 5:30 to 6:30. So we have one this evening, and our host, our presenter is Nahid, who many of you know. She's been doing these since January. We're not meeting next Tuesday, which is our typical meeting day because that's the Independence Day holiday. And but the following week on July 13th, which is a Thursday, is our monthly mixer. We're heading back to Presto in Huntington Beach for a time of some fellowship and some camaraderie and some drinks and just sharing with each other. And then, as Steve mentioned earlier, or Hassan may have mentioned this, we have another presentation from a different person on ChatGPT, and that's coming up on July 18th, same time, 11 a.m. to 12:30. And that's going to be driving leads into your coaching practice with ChatGPT. It also gives you, it's eligible for 1.5 CCE units from ICF Global. Lots of other things coming up. Please feel free to check on that link. And again, on behalf of the board here of ICF Orange County and all of our members, Steve and Hassan, thank you for being with us. For those who need to leave, please feel free to leave, but we will, I see applaud there from Linda, clapping for you guys. And again, thank you, Steve, for being gracious to stay on here for a few more minutes for those of you who would like to. And feel free to reach out to Hassan or Steve. Their emails there are on our screen. And just phenomenal. And this is just the tip of the iceberg on this field. But you guys are in the cutting edge and early times of this to share this with us. So thank you.
Thank you. We really appreciate having the opportunity to speak with you, and it's good to get to know you, Daryl. I appreciate what you're doing here, and look forward to keeping up with you guys over time.
Great discussion, great questions. Thank you so much for bringing all these questions up. It makes the this interaction very dynamic and a great place to talk.
And feel free to unmute yourself like Linda if you have a question right now, to do it that way.
I'm trying to figure out how to download the videos.
Oh, okay. You can, if you just send me or Hassan an email, we will send them to you.
Right.
Or if you do that thing, it will give you a place to download it. But either way.
Okay, great. I'll do that in just 5 minutes. Thank you. Take care.
Thank you.
Thanks, Linda. See you soon.
Thank you very much. It was very interesting. Good, great information.
Great. Thanks for the feedback.
I'm just curious. I put it in the chat, but I think it's up there a ways now. How little audio someone needs in order to generate a completely new statement sounding just like someone. I'm concerned, right? So now anytime anything says, so-and-so said such and such, and that's just the beginning, and so it just, you used to be able to look for the dubbing. But with AI, I don't know, what are some tips that you would give us, not necessarily as coaches, but as people coming up to an election year or,
This is deja vu all over again. My first job out of college, which I didn't mention here, was for a company that built an imagery touching system. So the Sears catalog used to be done with ours. Now this is prior to Photoshop, right? So we all know Photoshop, you can't trust an image anymore, right? But I remember back in the day when our systems were, I think it started at $250,000 for a company to use our system. Well, in our company, you didn't let anyone get your picture, because if they got your picture, they were going to mess with that and then produce a picture that came out. And people didn't know back then this was even possible. This is prior to Photoshop. And it was one of those like, wow, how are we ever going to trust photos, right? And now we've learned you really can't trust a photo. Well, now you're not going to be able to trust a video. You're not going to be able to trust audio. It's unfortunate. It's just the way that we've learned to not trust photos anymore is the same way we're going to have to do this.
Well, but that brings me back then to what ends up being is what you can trust is what you can actually see with your own eye, like in person. And so maybe part of the leverage that we'll be able to have is, being in person with someone is really all you'll be able to trust.
I think yes, and I think there will be technologies that will come and support that as well. So say, for instance, whether you like Elon Musk politics or not, what he's trying to do with Twitter is he's recognizing we need a source that you can trust, right? And so if you have, and one of the biggest problems with robots and all of that, if there's no barrier to entry to somebody creating, like I could create a script and create 1 million free accounts on Twitter, right? As a programmer, I can do that. But since you have to pay to be verified, right? And somebody gets verified, yes, when someone is talking on Twitter and it's a verified account, that is them, right? So I think you're going to see a yes and in person is going to be more important than ever. And there's going to be technologies that are going to come that are going to be trusted technologies that have verification processes such that that when a tweet comes from this person or account from that, from that person is that person. So I think you will find technology to come in and fill some of these gaps for us.
Okay.
I think there's also a physical aspect to that too, just to present another option. If you, like you say, you trust your own eyes, your own ears, your own senses, I would say there's also a piece of this that maybe trusted networks will be used. So they use this in software technology all the time. So maybe you trust yourself and you trust your spouse or you trust your best friend. And it's kind of like the adjacent node if we're talking about networking. And so maybe you trust those things. And so over time, as we start to deal with the ability for technology to kind of obfuscate or to duplicate, these sources, there's going to be people that we do trust, and there's going to be people that you say, okay, well, I wasn't at that rally, and I didn't hear the statements directly, but I trust this person. And so there will be ways that humans will adapt to figure out what we can and cannot trust. I mean, pictures have been, I do photography as a hobby. I used to do it as a business earlier in my career, and it's been known you can dodge and burn on photos and create things that weren't there and adjust things. I mean, this has been this way since photography first was invented. And Photoshop obviously did not kill the fact that we can say, oh, I was actually at the beach last week or I wasn't. So there's just going to be an aspect of trust there that we just have to re-examine if whether or not that's through technology direct, like Steve mentioned, or if that's through networks that we have as trusted individuals. That will also be an area of that.
And I say technology is like a hammer, right? When a hammer first came out, a hammer could be used for good or bad. It can be used to build a house to protect our family, or it can be used to kill our neighbor, right? It's just a tool. And in the same way, technology, it can hurt us or we not trust it. It's going to come alongside and support us as well. So it's really kind of it's a two-sided coin.
And I just want to chime in really fast. I forgot I didn't stop the recording, so I hope that was okay to have that on the recording still, Katie. I know you did ask that question earlier, so I figured that's okay. I know we only have probably a couple minutes left here, but Erica's had her hand up for a while here. I'd like to make sure she has her question addressed. Erica?
Thank you so much. I'm gonna ask Victor's question because I'm actually in the middle of a job search right now. So could you just talk a little bit about how, and I'm gonna just read your question as you typed it, Victor. How do you spot resume and cover letters written by AI, specifically cover letters? I know that you go in and as everything you said, you need to bring the personalization into it, but could just say something a little bit about how resumes and cover letters would work. Thank you.
So are you talking from the perspective of how you can write a good cover letter and resume, or how as an HR manager, you use tools to support your need to find the right person for a role?
I guess both. One, as a job seeker, that I want to write the best cover letter, but I also don't want to be marked down by the HR person who has these tools and is, questioning whether or not their perspective really knows the job or not.
Good question. I don't have the answer because I don't have that experience in HR. So what I would do is I would absolutely use it to help you write, but I mean, it shouldn't be just written by ChatGPT. An HR specific person would know the tools that they have right now. I'm just doubting that they're using tools to say which of these were written by ChatGPT. To be honest, the tools that I've heard that they're using are more of like, this is what we need in this person. and we're getting tens of thousands of resumes in for that. How do you isolate this down to a reasonable amount that we can begin to talk to? So it's more around how those tools, how you pop up for a given role, than that is my guess. But I don't know, Hassan, do you have any domain knowledge on this?
Yeah, so there are a lot of tools out there that are used to process like applicant tracking systems, and there's a whole debate in the community around whether or not those will screen out based upon certain phrases being overused, right? So that's been around for a long time. But what I would suggest is, definitely start with a template that you can get from a ChatGPT, but then you really do want to modify that to be unique, right? You do want to, the cover letter is your opportunity to kind of sell your humanity, right? So if you have your resume, which is just the quantitative list of your accomplishments, your resume is really the qualitative description of who you are as a person. And so my suggestion would be start with ChatGPT and then edit it to make it personal, right? To get your personality to come through. Like why should they hire you? Why should they care about you as a person? ChatGPT is not going to have that. So I would say start with that. And then the other side, in order to recognize it, if you're the HR professional, you're going to start to see some of the same things come through. It's going to start to sound really like it's canned. But I wouldn't say that's any different than it is today, because today a lot of people, when the website asks for a cover letter, will just clone their existing cover letter and it sounds very bland. And they'll just cut and paste in the job role and say, dear such and such. So, I mean, this problem has already existed. Again, these tools just allow you to get further down the process of creating the content, but you still do need to add your own expertise, your own personality to it. So that would be my suggestion.
Yeah, that's, I think, the main thing. It's like, again, it don't just you do it as is, because it might be a little boring. If you play with ChatGPT, some of the stuff is a little very boring and very like generic. And it's like, this could be said about any musician or whatever, let's say, for an example.
Exactly.
I think we have time probably for one more question. And I know
Victor
that
has a question.
Victor had his hand up.
Mhm.
So if, and I think you will be the last one, because I do want to be mindful of all of our times today, especially our guests, Hassan and Steve. So Victor.
All right. I wasn't sure you mentioned me. So I'm that HR professional, and have a comment about the resumes and job hunting. My daughter taught me this. She goes to the ChatGPT, and based on the job posting, she asks questions around what are the competency-based interview questions for the job posting requirements. And so she gets great information that way.
Love it.
Yeah.
Really good.
Now,
Yeah.
trying to interpret and read into AI generated, there are some key words and phrases that often are caught. And if people don't cut and paste properly, you can tell that it's a shaded, response from ChatGPT. The real clincher is in the job interview. So it may get you in the door, but obviously it's got to be face-to-face or Zoom-based interview. That's where you'll really need to drive harder into candidates and know what to ask. Well, thanks for including me and offering this program.
Yeah, no, of course. And again, I want to give, if you haven't had a chance to see the comments.
And I put the July 18th session in the chat.
Yeah, well, we could chat about that. Yeah, if you go on the website, you have the information there about that July 18th event. So, but again, thank you for being here, Steve and Hassan. You're again very gracious with your time.
I haven't heard anything. I will do it.
If you probably didn't see it, a chance to see it in the chat, but there's a lot of really great comments and really great, thanks to you guys and to our chapter for hosting this. And I know Katie, who was ICF program manager for the Sacramento, I think, chapter, she'll probably be reaching out to you. I think she wants to maybe have this on their calendar.
And I am done
going forward.
Absolutely.
So, but yeah, so again, thank you for being here. And please reach out to Hassan and Steve, our wonderful presenters today, and have a blessed day, blessed week, blessed holiday next week for those who celebrate, and for the holiday for our Muslim friends this coming Thursday as well. I try to always be inclusive, since I also work with DEI here in our chapter, be inclusive of all the many people here that make up the Orange County, California chapter. Thank you again. Have a wonderful day. And oh, there we go. Now I see all your faces. It's back to the Brady Bunch layout. It's good to, again, thanks for being here. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me or to Hassan or Steve, and have a great day. So we'll see you soon.
Right. Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.